Somewhere in Ohio, a stadium built for tennis just turned into something that looked and sounded like a homecoming for an entire nation, and the woman at the center of it almost lost. 2 years ago, this exact opponent knocked her out of a Grand Slam qualifying round and sent her home in tears. This time, the same opponent had her on the ropes again. What happened in the next 20 minutes is the reason this video exists, and if you stay until the end, I'll show you exactly why this one match might matter more than the trophy she won 3 weeks ago. Before we get into it, if you're tired of tennis videos that just repeat a headline without checking a single fact, that's exactly why this channel is different. I go through the actual match data, the actual quotes, the actual numbers, so you get the real story instead of a guest dressed up as news. If that's the kind of coverage you want, hit subscribe right now, because what I'm about to show you about what's happening back home in the Philippines because of this one player is honestly the most important part of this whole video. Let's set the scene properly. Alex Eala walked into the Cincinnati Open as the 17th seed, the highest seeding of her career at this level of tournament. That seed came with a first-round bye, something that would have been unthinkable for her a year earlier, when she was still fighting through qualifying rounds just to get into these draws. Cincinnati is a WTA 1000 event, one tier below a Grand Slam, with a total prize purse of roughly $7.4 million this year, up more than 40% from the year before. This was billed as her final tune-up before the US Open. What nobody could have predicted was who she'd be facing to open her account, and what that name meant to her. Her opponent in the round of 64 was Elena-Gabriela Ruse of Romania, ranked outside the top 70. On paper, that should not have been a dangerous matchup for a player ranked 20th in the world. But records on paper don't tell you everything. 2 years earlier, in the third round of the 2024 US Open qualifying tournament, Ruse beat Eala in 3 sets, denying her what would have been her first ever Grand Slam main draw appearance. Back then Eala was ranked outside the top 150. Ruse, at the time, had the edge. And heading into Cincinnati, that head-to-head record still read 0 wins for Eala against this exact opponent. So here's the tension nobody talked about enough going in. Eala had just come off the most historic month of her career, a maiden WTA title in Washington, a 7-match winning streak, a career-high ranking of world number 20. But she was also physically running on fumes. She had played 56 matches across 21 tournaments already this season. After her exit in Toronto to Belinda Bencic, she told reporters, half joking, that the first thing on her list wasn't more tennis, it was a haircut, because she genuinely hadn't had time for one in weeks. Her own uncle, sports executive Nali Eala, had publicly acknowledged the concern fans were raising about her schedule, explaining that as a top-tier player, WTA rules essentially force her to play every mandatory 1000-level event and every Grand Slam, whether her body is ready or not. The Philippine Tennis Federation's executive director, Tonet Mendoza, said plainly before Cincinnati that the priority now was simply getting Eala fresh enough to survive the stretch run into the US Open. So walking into this match, the question wasn't just could she win. It was could she still perform at all after the physical toll of the last 3 weeks, against the one player on tour who already had her number. And then the match began, and almost immediately, it looked like Ruse had come to settle an old score. Both players held serve through tense early games, each searching for a weakness. Eala found her rhythm first, breaking in the 4th game with a forehand down the line and a sharp cross-court backhand that had the crowd on its feet. She closed out the first set 6-3, landing a high percentage of first serves and staying composed through the long rallies Ruse likes to create. But Ruse wasn't done. She raised her level sharply in the 2nd set, taking control of the rallies and applying real pressure on Eala's return games. Suddenly Eala was down 4-5, 1 game away from a deciding 3rd set against an opponent who had already beaten her once before. This was the exact moment where the last 3 weeks of exhaustion could have caught up with her. Instead, she leaned on patience and depth, held her nerve on her 2nd serve, and forced a tiebreak. And in that tiebreak, she took over completely, closing it out to win the match in straight sets. 2 years of waiting for revenge against the player who once denied her a Grand Slam debut, settled in under 2 hours. Here's the part where the story stops being about tennis and starts being about something bigger, because this is exactly what happened the moment she walked off that court. Even in a city with one of the smaller Filipino populations she's played in front of this year, somewhere between 1 and 2,000 people locally, with roughly 17,000 across the entire state of Ohio, the stadium still filled with Philippine flags, custom shirts, and chants loud enough that broadcasters were still talking about it hours later. This wasn't supposed to happen in Ohio the way it happened in Washington and Toronto. And it happened anyway. Coco Gauff, months earlier, had already put into words what other players on tour were starting to notice about Eala's effect on the sport, thanking her publicly for bringing what she called a completely new demographic into women's tennis. Jessica Pegula, the player Eala beat in the Washington final, told the crowd afterward that what they were doing was helping grow the entire sport around the world. Those aren't small compliments. Those are two of the most accomplished players on tour publicly crediting a 21-year-old with expanding the audience for their entire profession. And here's the number that actually stunned me when I found it, the one that turns this from a nice story into something structurally important. Back home in Manila, on courts made of nothing more than crushed seashells, 4-year-olds are now picking up rackets for the first time because of her. Racket sales in the Philippines are up. Court space, already scarce, has become nearly impossible to book because parents are cramming their kids onto whatever practice courts they can find. The Philippine Tennis Association's own executive director put it simply, Eala isn't just bringing people to watch tennis anymore. She's bringing people to play it. Parents are looking at their kids and thinking, if we start this now, maybe they get to be the next Alex. That is not something a prize money list or a WTA ranking will ever capture. A trophy shows up on a stat sheet. A 4-year-old picking up a racket for the first time doesn't show up anywhere, and it might end up mattering more to the future of this sport in the Philippines than any single match score. So hold on to that thought, because here's where this gets genuinely uncertain, and it's the reason I need you to stick around instead of clicking away thinking you already know how this story ends. Eala's next test in Cincinnati was projected to be 10th-ranked Amanda Anisimova, a 2-time Grand Slam finalist she has never faced before on tour. Beyond that sits a possible 4th-round meeting with Wimbledon champion Linda Noskova, who has already beaten Eala twice this year, at Indian Wells and again in Berlin, both times comfortably. And beyond that, in the quarterfinals, a potential rematch with Jessica Pegula, the woman she dethroned in Washington. This is, by a wide margin, the toughest draw Eala has walked into all season. Every single name on that list is a player she either owes a win, has split with, or has never solved at all. And the stakes stretch past this one tournament. Eala is entering Cincinnati with 0 ranking points to defend, which means every match she wins here is pure upside toward pushing into the top 16 before the US Open draw is made. A top 16 seed at Flushing Meadows means a protected early draw at the single richest tournament in the sport. If her body holds up. If the fatigue from 9 matches in 13 days across Washington and Toronto doesn't finally catch up with her against players who are fresher and, in Noskova's case, have already solved her game twice this year. So here's what I want you to think about before you watch her next match. She just beat the one player who had unfinished business with her. She did it while running on almost no rest, in front of a crowd nobody expected to show up the way it did, in a city where the Filipino community is a fraction of the size it was in Washington or Toronto. That's the version of Alex Eala who is now walking into the hardest week of tennis she has played all year, against 3 players who have collectively given her more trouble than almost anyone else on tour. If she gets through even one more round of this draw, I'll be breaking down exactly what that means for her ranking, her seeding at the US Open, and the size of the payday waiting at the end of it. So if you don't want to miss that breakdown the moment it happens, subscribe now, because I post the numbers the same day, not 3 weeks later like everyone else covering this story. One last thing before you go. 2 years ago, Elena-Gabriela Ruse ended Alex Eala's dream of a Grand Slam debut. This week, Eala answered that. Now tell me, of the 3 names left in her Cincinnati draw, which one do you think finally stops her, or do you think she's about to prove she belongs with all of them? Drop your pick in the comments. I read every single one, and I'll tell you if you called it right in the next video.